and welcome back to another episode of the greatest show in the galaxy, the show where I, the curator, discuss my personal favorite show of all time, personal favorite franchise of all time, Doctor Who. And today we will be starting a brand new topic for the month, which is all about the music of Doctor Who, as I alluded to in the previous episode that I recorded with my good friend Soda, who so graciously stepped in pretty much last minute to help me pre-record that episode. However, as we always do on this channel, or rather on this show I should say, we have to start with the birthdays of the week from between June 28th and July 4th. 4th of July, for you American people. And we start our first candidate on the list here today with June 28th. We have a couple of big ones this week. I should point that out straight off the bat. We have a lot of companions as well as a lot of maybe companions, as well as a few miscellaneous ones. And as I was about to get into, on June 28th, we start with Daniel Weber. He was the main character on the K9 show that is sort of tangentially canon with Doctor Who. Some people consider it non-canon, some people do. I personally haven't watched it all the way through yet. I watched a few select episodes, and maybe, you know what, in celebration of Doctor Who's anniversary coming up later this week, and definitely for the 60th anniversary, I will definitely give this show a watch sometime in the near future. Also on June 28th, we have the wonderful and lovely Miss Lalla Ward. I keep not pronouncing that name correctly. Is it Lalla Ward or Lalla Ward? Lalla Ward, I believe. That's how she pronounced it on Big Finish interviews. She played the character of Romana. More specifically, Romana 2. As a matter of fact, she actually started her journey in Doctor Who as Princess Atra of Atrios, and she also reprised that role in a Big Finish episode some years ago, but obviously she's mostly known for playing the Time Lady, second incarnation of Romana, who traveled with the Fourth Doctor and then later went on to become the Lord President of Gallifrey in the Gallifrey series on Big Finish. Next, on June 29th, we have Catherine Jenkins. You might not remember her, but she actually played the character of Abigail in the Christmas Carol episode. She traveled with the 11th Doctor and Kazran Sardik for various different Christmases in that episode. That's why I said a lot of companions and a lot of sort of maybe companions. Next, on also June 28th, we have Maureen O'Brien, another name I keep mispronouncing wrong, and I wish someday I would learn how to do that. She played the character of Vicky Palminster, the companion of the First Doctor, and in many ways, the sort of replacement for Susan, in a way. Fun fact, she actually never had her full name used during the show itself. She was always known as Vicky. It was only in later years with later supplementary Doctor Who material that she was actually given a surname, which is Palminster. Now, on June 30th, we have Mr. Rupert Graves, another sort of maybe companion. He played John Riddell in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. Again, not a major character, but like I said, a sort of companion, which is why I decided to include him on this list. On July 1st, we have Ace Bhatti. He played the character of Haresh Chandra in the season 2 through 5 of the Sarah Jane Adventures. It was basically Sarah Jane's neighbor, as well as the headmaster of the school that Luke, Ronnie, and Clyde used to go to in the show. Also on June 1st, we have Matthew Jacobs. You might not be able to recognize him, but he's credited as the writer and co-producer of the 1996 TV movie. So I decided to include him on this list. Also on July 1st, Jean Marsh. She played another companion of the first Doctor, Sarah Kingdom. Now, although she only technically appeared in one serial alongside the first Doctor, which obviously is the Daleks' master plan. She unfortunately died trying to save the Doctor during the story itself. She also reprised the role of Sarah Kingdom in a number of various different Big Finish episodes that came out later. She also, something I did not know, she played the character of Morgaine in the Sylvester McCoy episode Battlefield. She also has a minor role in The Crusade, another William Hartnell episode, as well as The Wishing Beast and The Vanity Box, 2 Sixth Doctor Big Finish episodes. And she's also credited as a party guest, or rather uncredited party guest, in An Adventure in Space and Time. Next, we have Daphne Dare. She was a costume designer on a lot of the early William Hartnell episodes. In fact, most of the season 1 to 3 episodes of the William Hartnell era. And speaking of behind-the-scenes people from that era, lastly, rounding up our list is the woman called Patricia Russell. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing the name, Patricia Russell. She was a director on 4 completely separate serials from 3 different eras of the show: The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, Pyramids of Mars, and The Horror of Fangrock, from the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Doctors, respectively. So to the incredible long list of people that we have here today, thank you all. We quite literally could not do this without you. Now, on the topic of Doctor Who music, first of all, I have to say a huge, massive shout out to the Classical Nerd YouTube channel. I checked out his breakdown of every single Doctor Who main theme. So once you're done with this episode, please go ahead and check that video out. I will make sure Soda puts a link to that video in the comment section below of this video. He really does a really good job explaining all the technicalities and just the mechanics and the history of the main Doctor Who theme from the William Hartnell era all the way up to the Jodie Whittaker era. And there's actually a lot of really insightful points to be made from that video, and it was instrumental, pun not intended, instrumental in helping me do my research for today's episode. Now, again, I highly recommend watching his episode because he talks a lot about musical, technical stuff that I'm not smart enough to understand because I have zero musical talent whatsoever. So if you know about bars and keys and C minors and F sharps and all those other stuff, I highly recommend checking him out because he's going to do a much better job explaining it than me. But what I'm going to try to do is just talk about the basic history and the people associated with the main Doctor Who theme, as well as some incidental music, because that's something that he does not really talk about in his video. And sort of, to the best of my abilities, try to take you all on a sort of journey of discovery of the Doctor Who music, or at the very least, what the Doctor Who music means to me. Now, obviously, I try to put this screwdriver down because the noise is very distracting. Music is such a vitally important element, not only in Doctor Who, but in other various sci-fi and fantasy genres, both on television and movies. If you don't believe me, just seriously try to watch the scene in Star Wars: A New Hope, where Luke stares out into the twin suns right outside the Lars family homestead after having a disagreement, shall we say, with his Uncle Owen. Try watching that scene without music. If you still don't believe me, try watching the scene in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone when all the first year of Hogwarts students go on these boat rides on the Black Lake, staring at the massive Hogwarts castle in front of them. Try watching that scene without music. It is no coincidence that both of these musical scores were written by John Williams, probably the greatest of all time. Actually, no, the greatest of all time. Yeah, so the coincidence there is not lost on me. But if you still don't believe me, try watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy without music. Try watching Game of Thrones without music. And more important for today's episode, try watching Doctor Who without music and see if you have the same level of immersion that that you get when you watch it with the music. You can't. The music is such a vitally important part of the immersion of the viewer into this sci-fi universe that we are now watching. Now, on the topic of incidental music, because I will be covering that also in today's episode, the very concept of, obviously, let me restart. Early Doctor Who in the classic era did have some incidental music, however, it wasn't quite as prominent as it is in the modern era, specifically with the multitude of Murray Gold soundtracks and musical tracks that he did for every single episode. Obviously, like I said, some incidental music was used in some of the earlier episodes. It got more and more prominent as the show went on, but the very concept of each episode having a unique musical theme wasn't really a thing yet, and more importantly, the very idea of individual characters having their own specialized musical theme did not really exist quite yet. Obviously, in the modern era, characters such as Rose, Martha Jones, and for some stupid reason, Anna Mitchell all have their own unique individual musical themes that plays when a major scene with those characters is taking place. The Doctor himself or herself have their own unique theme that changes from Doctor to Doctor. And I'm not talking about the opening theme, I'm talking about the main Doctor's theme that plays when a major scene with the Doctor is taking place. And obviously some of the alien monsters have their own unique identifiable theme, similar to how Superman has his own unique iconic theme that it's easily recognizable. Same thing that the X-Men characters have their own unique musical theme, which is the main music theme from the 90s. In Doctor Who, in the modern era at least, or at least specifically during the Murray Gold time period of on the musical side of things, the Daleks had their own unique musical theme. The Cybermen had their own unique musical theme. The Master had his own unique musical theme, and so on and so forth. In the classic era of the show, this was more or less not really a thing. It was mainly just music to set up the atmosphere of everything that is happening on screen. It was mainly action music, and particularly during the 70s, at least the way I see it, it was very video game-ish music. And I'm not talking about modern video games, I'm talking more of the really early 80s Game Boy type music, which is ironic because I'm referring specifically to the 70s era of the show and had music which I would classify as 80s era video game music. It's a bit of a wibbly-wobbly journey there. Now, we are going to start on talking with, obviously, the main Doctor Who theme, which brings us to the background picture of today's episode. Now, as the classical nerd states in his wonderfully masterful video, the specific genre of music that the Doctor Who theme, the main theme, belongs to, or at least in the early days, is called musique concrète, as a genre first devised in 1958. Again, watch his video. He does a much better job explaining this than I. But it was a musical genre that was mostly electronic music and used and primarily uses a, uh, these types of musical instruments that were used by the BBC in what is now known as BBC Radiophonic Workshop, as seen right here in this picture. These are the people that worked in the Radiophonic Workshop. Now, something that's very actually important to note, and something that's very much affected the history of music on the show till about fairly recently, is that the people who worked in the Radiophonic Workshop, worked on various different music for their various different BBC-related projects with complete and utter anonymity. Almost tripped over my words there for a second. Complete and utter anonymity, meaning that if credit was given at all to the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, it would be given to the Radiophonic Workshop itself, not the individual people who composed and created the musical composition. Which is why in the early days of Doctor Who, you see music written by, or rather in the credits you see music by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. A lot of the people you see right here in this picture were primarily unknown for the majority of their time on the show, and unknown and uncredited, I should say. Now, really, the only person that, or rather, two persons of interest that we need to be looking at for the early Doctor Who theme are two people by the name of Ron Grainer, who wrote the musical composition of the score of Doctor Who, and Delia Derbyshire, who actually performed the musical score itself. Delia Derbyshire was what we would consider to be an expert on the sort of electronic music and crafting electronic music in the way that the BBC Radiophonic Workshop was handled, and the actual art itself of creating the musical theme for Doctor Who was primarily not actual orchestral music like a lot of TV shows today utilize, but rather the art of taking certain sounds that normally wouldn't really make sense in a musical track, but sort of tweaking them and reshaping them into actual sounds and notes that can be used in electronic music, like the Doctor Who main theme. Now, the main Doctor Who theme, as so actually gracefully pointed out by the classical nerd, is mostly split into three different parts, and that is how we will be referring to all three of these parts in today's show. The Melody 1, Melody 2, and the Middle 8, which I'm actually so fun. I was actually so excited to hear that part of the theme actually has a proper name, the Middle 8, which is my and a lot of other people's favorite part of the musical theme. Now, obviously, since I don't really know much about music and keys and notes, I will be trying to break down these parts of the main musical theme into stuff that my brain can actually convey to an audience. So the first thing we will be discussing about the main theme is the tapping noise. The tapping noise is, or at least that's how I like to call it, the tapping noise is the iconic da-da-da-dum, 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 dum-dum, which is really present in every single iteration of the Doctor Who musical theme. Now, here's a little where we get into a little bit of fan theory and headcanon. Obviously, this theme was written well before the time when people actually knew what the Doctor's race is, Time Lords, well before everyone knew that Time Lords, and more specifically the Doctor, have two hearts. It was written years before anyone knew anything of any significance about the Doctor's character. However, taking what information we know today and applying it to music that was written well before that, I have surmised a sort of mini fan theory that this tapping noise, da-da-da-dum, 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 is actually the heartbeat of a Time Lord, the double heartbeat of a Time Lord, because as I previously mentioned, Time Lords have two hearts, and as we learn later in the modern era of the show, the Master is hearing a sort of drumming noise in his head, a sort of 4 knocks rhythm, which was later revealed in the End of Time Part 2 to be the heartbeat of a Time Lord, because hearts beat boom, 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 boom. And if you have 2 hearts, it would be boom, 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 boom. Again, concepts that my tiny brain can convey to people. So in my understanding, in my own personal headcanon, is that this tapping noise is actually the heartbeat of the Doctor in the musical theme. And I'll get into explaining why and where these ideas are coming from next week, because it's heavily tied into the main theme of the modern era of the show, but that's later down the road. So the tapping noise makes up the very base part of the musical theme. It actually runs all the way through from the beginning of the theme to the very end of it. And on top of this tapping noise, we have the Melody 1, Melody 2, and the Middle 8, which I discovered their names by watching the Classical Nerd video. The Melody 1 is and please excuse my lack of musical talent, but the Melody 1 is the iconic using my hands to hopefully try to convey the feeling of music into your ears. The Melody 2 is and the Middle 8, as I mentioned, my favorite part of the musical theme is the iconic really hope I'm getting through to you guys. Obviously, I'm not a composer myself, but this is the best way I can convey my feelings about the main theme itself to an audience. And according to the Classical Nerd in his video, the Middle 8 is so named because of the 8 bars in a single bridge that are in this section of the theme. Again, completely musically illiterate myself, so that's why I highly recommend checking people who know what they're talking about, not me. But the musical theme itself, as I mentioned, was written and composed by Ron Grainer. I'll show this picture again, and was actually performed in the BBC Radiophonic Workshop by Delia Derbyshire. It was also played to the sort of psychedelic imagery that was constructed in the BBC Sound Effects Workshop, which is potentially a subject for another time. But Delia Derbyshire actually saw these psychedelic images of the main Doctor Who theme, which was mainly just a bunch of lights and bubbles and burbles on screen, with the Doctor Who title itself randomly generated from these air bubbles. And she went ahead and applied Ron Grainer's composition of the theme to the images that she saw on screen, which created the iconic theme that we all know and love today. Now, another thing that Delia Derbyshire added to specifically the first version of the theme, the one that's primarily used throughout the William Hartnell era of the show, is sort of hissing noises and background sound effects, which in a way, in as much of a way that the melody itself of Doctor Who is split into 3 parts, Melody 1, Melody 2, and the Middle 8 section, one could argue that the actual theme itself, specifically in those early days, is also comprised of 3 main elements: the tapping noises, the melody that I just conveyed with my hands, and any sort of added on background sound effects. Now, obviously, two of these main components have pretty much remained exactly the same, the tapping noise and the melody, while the extra sound effects that were added on top change primarily from doctor to doctor. Some doctors have them and some doctors don't. But specifically, as I mentioned, for the William Hartnell era of the show, when the theme itself was in its most basic of states that it has ever been, the extra added sound effects for these hissing noises that almost makes it sound like someone is actually breathing into a microphone while you're actually hearing the main musical theme itself. Sort of, which was played all in tandem with the main theme itself. So you have, like I said, so as was mentioned in a BBC video that you can see the thumbnail of it here. I actually used it for thumbnail for this show. It is on the Doctor Who YouTube channel, and you can actually see, or rather see Dilya Derbyshire explaining how they constructed the main theme itself back in the early days. They recorded 3 completely separate tracks, as I mentioned: the tapping noise, the melodies, and the hissing sounds. They were recorded separately and then played all 3 of them at the exact same time to construct the main theme. And I'm pretty sure that they also mentioned that all 3 of these were played completely out of sync with each other. And ironically, it helped. It is what helped make the theme itself as iconic as it is. Now, this main part of the theme with the tapping noise, the melody, and hissing noises was around in the show from the very first episode of the show, On an Earthly Child, or the very first serial, 100,000 BC. Again, as I mentioned in the first episode of the show, it all depends on how you choose to classify that first episode. But it went from that episode all the way to some of the first few Patrick Troughton episodes. Can't at the moment quite remember what was the last episode to use that particular theme in the Patrick Troughton era. I do know that the first episode that featured a completely different and updated version of the theme was the Macra Terror, which featured the Second Doctor, Ben Jackson, Polly Wright, and Jamie McCrimmon. In that first ever change to the original theme, not only did the air bubbles and wind bubbles on the main visual side of the theme changed significantly to a sort of construct with stairs that also slightly resembles a pipe organ, and then transitions into just a sort of geyser of bubbles right at the end, right during when the title of the episode itself is being shown to the audience. The main theme itself had a slight change in the audio department, which completely got rid of the hissing noises and replaced it with a sort of whirling type noise, which sounded a lot like, again, trying to use my voice and hands to convey sounds, which obviously I cannot because I'm completely musically illiterate. But that was the first major change to the main theme of the show, and was changed slightly even further when Doctor Who transitioned into color. Obviously, this theme lasted all the way from the Macra Terror till Patrick Troughton's final episode, The War Games, and when the show returned about a year later, 6 months to a year later, with 1970's Spearhead from Space, which was the first, not only the first John Pertwee episode, but also the first color episode of the show. that was when Delia Derbyshire, who was still working on the theme at that time, decided that the beginning of the theme needed something much more interesting added onto it, as opposed to just boom, a cold opening with the theme itself. Obviously, something I forgot to mention, in the William Hartnell era of the show, the theme itself began with the main beam of light rising up into almost the top of the screen, then transitions into the actual tapping noise, while the Patrick Troughton era of the time, the Patrick Troughton opening theme just starts with this construct of the pipe organ stairs thing with the theme itself. The John Pertwee era theme actually has a bit of a beginning to it, which is just the first part of the tapping noise just being played sort of almost like an echo before transitioning into the main proper tapping noise, which is then accompanied by the two melodies. As a sort of that, again, that's the best way I can convey that that bit of musical sound notes into this conversation. Now, that was it for the beginning of the theme itself. As for the closing theme, which ended every single episode, because as in true Doctor Who fashion, every episode, especially in the classic era, ended with a massive cliffhanger, because again, these episodes were serialized, split into several different parts, so they needed something to give the audience sort of a audible cue for the audience to know that the episode is now ending and it's going to transition into the credits of the episode. Now, in order to create this sort of built-up tension, Delia Derbyshire used a sort of electronic scream, which is still used in certain variations in the modern era of the show. The sort of... Now, here's where this electronic scream is different from the modern era of the show, which is in the original John Pertwee era of the show, which lasted all the way up to, I believe, the Tom Baker era of the show, rather 6 out of the 7 seasons of Tom Baker. The electronic scream actually continued on and almost sort of merged into the Melody 1 section of the theme, which created a sort of part of the main theme itself. As for on the visual side of things, it was basically used the same 2D flat visuals similar to the ones used in the William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton era, except once again, now they actually had the possibility of color for the most part. Obviously, some of you may know that some of the original episodes from that particular era of Doctor Who were missing. For the 60s episodes, those episodes are now gone, but for some of the John Pertwee era episodes, these episodes do actually still technically exist in visual form, except they do not have the color versions of some of those episodes. So some of the John Pertwee era episodes, particularly with regards to the opening theme, don't have the main colors of the opening visual part of the theme itself. And for the most part, like I said, the visuals themselves were just 2D flat versions that almost sort of, at least in my interpretation of it, resembles a sort of human rib cage on a mirror, slightly, with some wavy bits at the top that wiggle around and not necessarily ever touching the main sort of arrow-shaped rib cage in the beginning. And those parts in particular sort of change colors as the theme itself goes on. Obviously, the build up to the opening theme, the starts with the main arrow-shaped rib cage starting from the center outwards, then adding the two warbling bits on the two sides of the screen. Then after a little bit of that psychedelic nightmare, there's an effect that sort of mirrors a very colorful fountain type motion, which then slowly transitions into John Pertwee's face, superimposed on to the main screen. Again, something I completely forgot to say earlier, because I'm doing this all in one sitting. The Patrick Troughton era of the show also introduced the concept of having the Doctor's face, rather the actor playing the Doctor, appear superimposed into the main theme itself. The construct of the stairs with pipe organ. It's very, and now I'm realizing it kind of very much similar to the main construct of the Asgardian castle in the Thor movies. Sort of erupts into a fountain that sort of sticks onto the front side of the screen, and then Patrick Troughton's face just sort of comes out of nowhere at you, going backwards and then sort of melting into the Doctor Who title logo itself. Something relatively similar happens with the John Pertwee introduction in the main theme. There's a fountain that erupts into a psychedelically colored version of John Pertwee's face that slowly gets clearer and clearer as the theme goes on, which then goes into like a complete picture of John Pertwee's face itself, really up close, and then another fountain sort of comes out in the middle of John Pertwee's face, and the image of John Pertwee's face sort of starts to melt away into the background, which then results into a spiral that has the title of Doctor Who behind it. And obviously the spiral continues on playing while the main theme is playing, and it shows us the main title of the episode, the writer of the episode, and which part, or at that particular time, what was the number of the episode in the serialized episode itself. Now that was the main deal with the John Pertwee era theme on the musical side and on the audio side. However, on one occasion, somewhere in the really early, somewhere in the mid Pertwee era of the show, the BBC Radiophonic Workshop got a brand new synthesizer to make music with, and just figured they had to play with it and had to make a brand new Doctor Who theme for the show using that new synthesizer, and the result was quite horrifying to say the least. They named the synthesizer itself Delaware, not after the American state, but after the I can't remember if it's a state or a city, but it was named after the road right side of the Radiophonic Workshop studio, and that is how that one-off Doctor Who theme, which I believe was used in one episode, one serial, Carnival of Monsters, that theme was then given the name the Delaware theme, which was used, thankfully, only once and never used again. Personally, myself, I'm not a fan of that theme. That music. It's the musical theme itself. But as a fan thing, I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that it actually has a sort of origin story and sort of the forgotten child of Doctor Who musical themes. Fun fact: that theme actually is used in one Big Finish monthly range episode, which I believe is The One Doctor, the name of the episode. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do remember that theme was actually used on one occasion in the early days of the Doctor Who monthly range on Big Finish. So keep your ear out for that. or don't. But basically, the theme itself, which was commonly referred to as John Pertwee on a pogo stick, because the sound itself sounds actually very, very bouncy and boingy. I think I just remembered the word for that theme, but that was basically it as far as the theme itself. It was the tapping noise that I mentioned earlier was sort of almost replaced with a sort of bouncy, boingy noise that sounded a lot like boing, 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 boing. And the main melody was sort of very screechy and distant type sound, sounding like a drunk fly for some reason. And the main sound effects on top of it were sort of replaced with this very electronic, computery noise that almost makes you feel like you're living in the Matrix. Again, it's a wild ride of a trip to try and listen to, and I highly recommend listening to that theme, if for no other reason than just to understand how far that theme went wrong and how easy it is to ruin the musical theme for Doctor Who. Now, thankfully, something that I've noticed while doing this show is that the John Pertwee era was really very much a trial and error type era, a sort of throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. They tried a lot of experimental things with the show itself and with the Doctor, and in some cases they actually realized how bad of an idea it was, so it was only there for one episode, and then they immediately went back to the way things are supposed to be. Like, as I mentioned, the Delaware theme that I just talked about right now, as well as something from a few episodes ago, the TARDIS that was shown in the Time Monster, the horrible-looking salad bowls look that me and Ryko clearly hated in that episode. It was one episode, then in the follow-up episode, it went completely back to the original, the previous look that the TARDIS has been using for the last couple of seasons. Now, in John Pertwee's final season, and also to celebrate a decade of Doctor Who now, because it was season 11 for Doctor Who at that point, they still kept the same exact musical theme. However, they gave John Pertwee a different looking opening theme and opening and closing theme on the visual side of things, as well as changing the logo of the show, which resulted in the iconic sort of diamond-shaped logo that a lot of fans are still familiar with to this very day. The theme itself, once again, it starts with the buildup of the distant echoing, but on the visual side, it's sort of dots sort of flying towards you, almost like traveling in hyperspace in a Star Trek type, early Star Trek type of light speed, but then it sort of very quickly emerges into a sort of tunnel-shaped visual, which then sees a really distorted image of John Pertwee's face sort of slowly coming into view before becoming an actual proper image of John Pertwee's full body, which I believe was the first and last Doctor to actually use the full body of the actor for the opening theme. But after seeing the full body of John Pertwee, the entire body then shoots all the way into the back, and then just becomes another section of the tunnel that slowly takes over the screen itself, and then almost coming from behind the camera's face itself, the logo, the diamond-shaped logo of Doctor Who comes into the background, goes all the way into the back, and then just opens up another tunnel, another section of the tunnel, which is where the title of the episode, writer of the episode, and number of episodes number of parts in the episode is shown to the viewer. Next, we transition into the Tom Baker era of the show, still using the original Delia Derbyshire theme that was used for the second Doctor, I believe. The opening section of the opening build-up of that was completely dropped for Tom Baker's era of the show, and instead the show itself starts with these sort of headlights pointing in two completely opposite directions from the center of the screen, pointing left and right, and then both of them sort of turn to overshadow the entire screen with their lights, which reveals the image of the TARDIS, which for some reason has a very blob-shaped, blocky light on top, as opposed to the original, as opposed to the way that the light on top of the TARDIS actually looks like. But the actual image of the TARDIS slowly transitions into, slowly closes into the main view of the screen, and then opens up the familiar tunnel that was first introduced in the Jon Pertwee era, just slightly updated with new visuals for the Tom Baker serial. And after a little bit of traveling in that tunnel, the image of Tom Baker with the scarf slowly superimposes itself onto the tunnel itself, stays there for a couple of seconds, and then opens up into another section of the tunnel where you can actually see, as previously mentioned, the title of the episode, writers, and number of episode. Obviously, this iconic part of the opening theme was very famously used in the Family Guy Star Wars parody episode, specifically the first one, which is ironic because it's actually the Millennium Falcon going into hyperspace for the first time in that series of parody episodes. Going into actual Star Wars stuff, the first time we actually do get to see hyperspace in Star Wars. Just wanted to point that out. Now, after serving for 6 years in the role as the Doctor, the theme itself, which has remained pretty much the same throughout the first 6 seasons of Tom Baker's run as the Doctor, it was very much apparent that it was time for a brand new version of the theme and a brand new opening visual side of things, because it was starting to really get distorted because they kept reusing the same sort of theme that was recorded a decade and a half ago in the early 60s, and they kept re-splicing and reusing it and reshooting it, that it was starting to sound very much distorted and really, really kind of messy. So by the time of Tom Baker's final season, they decided to move away completely from the original Delia Derbyshire written theme and use a theme created by a brand new Doctor Who composer, Peter Howell. Now, Peter Howell was very much aware of the aforementioned Delaware theme and how very easily it is to ruin the iconic Doctor Who theme, so he definitely took that into account when creating his own version of the musical theme. This version is quite possibly the biggest and most drastic change from one theme to the next in the entire history of the show. Now, obviously, actually, let's take that for a second. The main theme itself opens with a sort of explosionary type thing, which again, building up on top of the build-up that was made for the Jon Pertwee era of the theme. This early part of the theme was personified by a sort of a distant explosion type of a which then transitioned into a new version of the tapping noise, which was performed by a keyboard synthesizer that Peter Howell had. transitioning from the explosion sound to a very electronic version of the tapping noise, which then transitioned into a very electronic version of the Melody 1 and Melody 2, which both, for the very first time in the show's history, there was a very significant distinction between the Melody 1 and the Melody 2 sections of the themes. The Melody 1 part was still kept a similar sounding sound. Try saying that when you're drunk. To the Derbyshire Melody 1 part, which then transitioned into the Melody 2 version, which was actually Peter Howell's voice coming from a sort of voice distorting microphone that he had in his workstation, which actually ironically sounds almost like an electric guitar. For the longest time, I actually thought that part of the theme was an electric guitar until I saw a video where Peter Howell explains how he crafted that theme, revealing that it was actually Peter Howell's own voice used in the theme itself, which sounded more along the lines of a which again sounds almost like a electric guitar / alien voice type thing. Now, the middle 8 section of the theme, which unfortunately was relegated to the very back of the theme since pretty much the John Pertwee era, because it was hardly ever used after the William Hartnell era, and I think maybe sometimes it was used during the Patrick Troughton era of the show. I can't remember, but the middle 8 theme itself actually had a big build-up. For the first and I believe the last time on the show, you hear these sort of incoming bits that is sort of, it was basically the third part of the theme that I mentioned earlier, the sound effects on top of the entire theme itself, which was sort of a, which then transitions into the middle 8 itself, which is probably the most dynamic of middle 8 sections of the theme in any other Doctor Who theme. Which sort of sounds like a so it was very sharp movements between all the different sections of the middle 8 theme. And obviously, after the middle 8 theme for the first time in the theme, Peter Howell actually added something new on top of all that, which is sort of a build-up to another section of the melody, which sounded like a do 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 do, which, and then after that, for the first time in the Doctor Who theme, the theme itself ended with a sort of explosion, which is sort of built up to, but then it just goes into a big boom sound in on the audio side of things. On the visual side of things, on the other hand, the opening theme, the opening and closing theme of Doctor Who throughout the majority of the 80s was primarily inspired by Star Wars, which was becoming increasingly popular during that time. The opening explosion part of the musical theme sort of opens with a couple of stars flying past the camera, which then proceeds to a sort of traveling through space type look for the theme itself, and you actually see stars in sort of rainbow-colored edges passing the main viewer, which is accompanied by several stars aligning themselves to form the basic shape of Tom Baker, later Peter Davison's faces on screen, and then sort of the faces of the actors Tom Baker and Peter Davison sort of melting into the shape of the stars, the shape created by the stars. After and after that, the faces themselves expanded all over the screen itself, and then went completely past the viewer of the that is now traveling through space, and then that led to the actual new and improved title of the show being formed by a bunch of these stars, which that then obviously is then sort of printed into the main Doctor Who logo, which also expands all over the entire screen itself. Which then obviously then transitions into sort of translucent words making up the title of the episode, the writer, and the number of parts. And then in Peter Davison's final episode, The Caves of Androzani, where this was the first and I believe last time that a Doctor actually. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this, but basically this was the first time where a Doctor was actually introduced, not in the end of the exact end of the series. Okay, like I said, there are very different ways of looking at this, but basically what I'm trying to say is there was one more episode in that season before Peter Davison left the show, is what I'm actually trying to say. Usually, what normally would have happened is the actors regenerated into their predecessor at the end of the final episode of the season, and then the new coming actor had their first episode in the next season, with the very clear exception of Patrick Troughton, because Patrick Troughton actually stepped into the shoes of William Hartnell after the second episode of season 4. For the case of Peter Davison and Colin Baker, like I said, there was one more episode still left in the season itself, and the actors sort of transitioned from one to the other in the penultimate episode, which then resulted in after Colin Baker comes out of the regeneration state as the brand new Doctor, he says his first lines to Perry, saying, "Change, my dear, and it seems not a moment too soon." And then the screen just freezes on his on a close-up of his face, which then transitions into his face appearing in the closing theme of the show. And the following week, there was a completely brand new look to the opening and closing theme. First of all, the star, it was still set primarily in a journey through space, but the stars themselves sort of looked bigger and a little bit different. And was also these sort of added on extra flares and visual effects added to the main opening and closing theme, which obviously also included, sorry about that, the formation of Colin Baker's face and stars sort of exploding onto his face, adding on the colors, which also transitions into Colin Baker smiling towards the audience for flying directly into the main character. The main camera, to reveal the opening title of the show itself. Now, in order to accommodate for all of these new bits of sound effects, new bits of visual effects and sort of on-screen messiness of the new theme, the new composer, Dominic Glynn, which basically had about a week and a half to construct a brand new theme for this new Doctor, tried to, basically what he did, he used the exact same theme that was originally composed by Peter Howell, except he added a few sound effects to sort of coincide with the new visual effects that were suddenly appearing onto the screen itself. Unfortunately, which didn't really make for much of a different sounding theme, even though it looked almost completely different. For Colin Baker's final season of the show, the Trial of Time Lord serials, of 1986, Dominic Glenn finally had the time and the resources to create the theme that he wanted to make all along, which still used the exact same opening visuals that have been used for Colin Baker's episodes up until that point, but with a almost completely different theme in and of itself, which borrows a lot of elements on the audio side from the Peter Howell version, but it actually sounds a bit darker, ironically, for the most colorful Doctor ever, but it was a lot darker and also sounding a bit distant, almost like echoed voices. And the way I perceive it, it almost sounds like distant sounds deep underwater. I'm not going to say different distant sounds from far away in space, because there's no sound in space, but this was basically the closest thing I have to an approximation of how this theme makes me feel. There's a lot of and I'm trying to really shorten this thing up because we're already way past the 1 hour mark, but the melodies and the actual sound effects on top actually sound like they're coming from a much different, distant area, which, while you're watching the visual side of the opening theme, it actually it really does immerse you, as I mentioned earlier in this episode. It helps with the immersion of making you feel like you're actually traveling through the dark depths of space with those audios and visuals. Then, unfortunately, as we've discussed in last week's episode, Colin Baker was unceremoniously fired from his role as the Doctor by the BBC and replaced with Sylvester McCoy, the last actor to play the Doctor on television in the classic era of the show. And the reins, if you call it that way, of the Doctor Who theme were then given to a man named Kev McCulloch, who pretty much took over all music composing duties for the show at large. Sadly, unfortunately, we won't have any time to talk about the incidental music that I wanted to talk about earlier in this episode, but life happens sometimes. But basically, what came out of the Sylvester McCoy version of the theme was the first ever on television, completely computer-generated opening theme, all the way back in 1987, which the theme itself didn't quite age as well as you would expect, but it was very much groundbreaking for its time. The theme itself, which more or less sounds completely different from everything that came before it, opens with, yet again, another splash explosion of just stars coming from one side of the screen, covering up the entirety of the screen itself, which then also move, the camera itself sort of moves with these bright white dots to reveal an entire galaxy of stars revolving in the center of the screen. You see a couple of asteroids flying into the very center of the galaxy itself, and then you see a massive circular force field with the TARDIS inside it spinning around. First time we actually get to see the TARDIS in predominantly used in the opening sequence since the Tom Baker days, but the TARDIS itself is the completely CGI TARDIS, spins around inside this glowing force field, which then takes you on a journey going from looking flatly into the galaxy itself to sort of looking above it. The force field itself then goes right into the center of the galaxy itself, then sort of melts away to reveal the image of Sylvester McCoy's face, which is actually the first time you actually get to see Sylvester McCoy in the show, was actually in the rather properly in the episode, was actually in the opening titles.
the galaxy, once the galaxy itself completely dissolved into the background, the sort of stern and serious look of Sylvester McCoy's face winks and smiles into the audience, which gave some people the creeps, but it was a sort of a subtle way of the showrunners to let people know that this is a much happier and more cheerful Doctor than the one that came before it. Then the screen itself sort of explodes, and you see the letters of WHO sort of moving into the front of the camera itself, almost bumping into the camera itself, sort of like a fourth wall break. In addition to winking it into the camera earlier in the theme itself, but after sort of bumping into the camera, and the entire screen sort of shakes from getting bumped by these metallic-looking letters. Those three letters rearrange themselves into the word "who," and then the word "doctor" sort of writes itself on its own with sort of magic fairy dust right above the W. And then also it reveals both the name, the title of the episode with the writer and the number of parts in just one sort of chart right underneath the massive "who" part of the theme. And as far as the closing theme itself, there's also there's once again the splash explosion of dots, which then transitions into the galaxy mentioned that was seen earlier in the opening section of the theme, except we're seeing it from below, with all the credits sort of appearing as they normally would on the screen itself, with some space debris flying around. And by the time it's time to wrap up the closing theme itself, the screen transitions into a sort of reverse of the splash explosion. You see the stars going back into where they originally exploded from to reassemble themselves and then disperse again as we see the familiar letters of the metallic WHO bumping into the screen again, writing down the word "doctor," and then completely exploding. And that was pretty much it and everything for the opening and closing themes of the show on the audio side and on the visual side. But something that I wanted to mention and almost completely forgot about, specifically for the Sylvester McCoy section of the theme, while a lot of the sounds themselves were completely different from the Colin Baker sounds, as I mentioned, the splash explosion was also accompanied by the sound of an explosion. The tapping noises actually received their first ever major change. It was no longer the iconic bum 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 bum. They sort of almost had a slightly altered rhythm to them in this Mr. McCoy section of the theme, sounding more along the lines of which is a concept that will be revisited in several of the modern era Doctors. But the Melody 1 and Melody 2, which mostly stayed relatively similar to one another, actually went back into a sort of electronic, almost wailing sound of but my favorite part of that theme is that the middle 8, for the very first time, was actually a mandatory part of watching the theme itself, which was actually played during when the force field TARDIS melted into the center of the galaxy, revealing Sylvester McCoy's face, which on the audio side of things actually almost sounded like a sort of guitar strings for the first half, but then it went back to the space wailing sound for the second half of the middle eight. It's much better experienced when hearing it as opposed to hearing me explaining it. But thankfully for me, since for the modern era of the show, it was mostly 1/2 composers making the music for the musical compositions for the show. Hopefully, next week's breakdown of the music will be a lot easier for me to explain. That is a story for another time. Again, I apologize if I did a really horrible job at conveying how these musical notes make me feel. But then, like I said, I have no musical talent whatsoever. So basically, what I tried to do is explain how these musical compositions affected me as a viewer and as a person, and as a fan of the show, and what these sounds sound like to me and look like to me, and try to combine the audios with the visuals, and hopefully it came out in a way that didn't make you all feel a bit distressed. Thankfully for you, I'm going to leave you with that for now, and you can go back to your regular lives. And hopefully, please do me a favor, try and check out the Classical Nerds video. He really does a much better job explaining this than I do. I can be found on my own YouTube channel, 50 Shades of a Geek. I've been mostly silent the past week and a half on my channel due to technical difficulties. Oddly enough, for today's episode, technical difficulties on the audio and visual side of things. But hopefully I'll be back to making more content next week. Yeah, I can also be found on this very same channel on the Northern Countdown with Soda and Ben. Soda and Ben can also be found on their own show called Northern Rewind. Is it Rewind? Yeah, I think it is Northern Rewind. Soda also has a show called The Squared Slice, where he talks about wrestling. We also have a TV show of lesser television shows with Daniel, Snark, and Dave. The aforementioned Ben Rayner can be found on his channel, The Multiverse of Geekdom. And you can also check out our good friends Taco on his channel, Something to Talk About, and Jess the Kiwi on her channel, Kiwi Jess. I think that's all the plugs that I have to say for now. So let's end this mostly musical episode by listening to a remixed version of the iconic theme written by Ron Grainer and performed by Didier Derbyshire, but with all the doctors randomly appearing in random parts of the show. So thank you for watching, and carry the music of the spheres in your hearts.